So, Lauren, why don't you just talk to me about, we're at this conference, obviously the biggest consumer conference of the year. You have all of the big companies here, all presenting their vision of how things are in the market and also where they see the future of the industries they're in. What are you seeing in terms of big changes?
Yeah. Well, the tone is very, very different. And like you said, we have some of the biggest companies in the industry here. And they all seem to have a bit of a spring in their step, which is not something I would have said last year, the year before, even 5 years ago, frankly. So it feels like it's not just that we've seen the stocks have a nice move, but the business fundamentals are there to back it up. And so you really feel a different sense of energy and enthusiasm from the management teams that are here.
But what's driving that? Because when you look at the economic picture, and certainly when you look at the global sort of macro picture, it does look quite uncertain. There are headwinds, there's potential recession coming down the pike. So why the sudden kind of injection of confidence?
Yeah. So the big companies are acting like leaders again. And that is something that just from a consumer standpoint, all you have to do is think about the things that you've been seeing on your Instagram feed or your friends are using, and there's new brands that are popping up left and right, and that's been the case over the last 5 years. And the big companies were really kind of caught a bit flat-footed for various reasons. They've now all gotten to a point where they're all different sort of points in the continuum of how much progress they've made, but of renewing themselves and finding new ways to operate in this new world where consumer preferences, desires, tastes have really changed and become a lot more local as well.
And is that a function of sort of disruption having happened and then it's forced sort of, as you say, a lot of the big consumer companies to restructure and to look at their operations? So it's sort of they've taken the pain and now they're able to go back to being in growth mode.
So the good news is that it's actually not just about the old way that we've seen so many times of this sort of desperate cut costs, restructure, reinvest, and hope everything's fixed. What we've seen is that doesn't really work or doesn't work for long enough. Instead, it feels like what's happened for a lot of these companies, there's been a deeper look inward, a deeper thought process around what do we need to do differently? Do we need to change the ways that we work, the ways that we are set up operationally, the ways that we listen to consumers and develop new products, the speed with which we do that? So it's really been for a lot of companies, and again, some are much further along than others, but a really holistic look at how they need to operate differently to react and behave and start leading again in this more dynamic consumer environment.
And the speed, as you mentioned, that's a huge part of this because the rapidity of change, if you like, at the moment in consumer tastes has never been greater. We're seeing sort of new things evolve and emerge all the time. How do the big companies, bearing in mind that they do need scale and they need to produce sort of in en masse, how do they marry those two sort of what seem like fairly conflicting needs, i.e. they need to move fast, they need to meet these sort of constantly emerging trends, but they also need to be big and deliver at scale?
Yeah, so that's actually been probably the crux of the problem of why so many of these companies were caught flat-footed and stayed that way for so long, is having these very healthy margin structures which were really constructed and built around scale, right? Doing one or two, or for some companies, 5 things really, really well, and then doing it globally. And what's happening, as we mentioned earlier and you referred to, is that locally consumers want things that feel right for them, right? And so the tastes and needs have really fragmented. So what's happening is that companies have done a couple things. I think one is from a financial algorithm standpoint, stepped back and said, maybe we shouldn't be so focused on margin percentage, but instead think about dollar profit growth. Because if we stick to the old ways of working, which was every innovation needs to be gross margin accretive, then we're leaving so much opportunity on the table and leaving opportunities that the small disruptors were kind of stepping in and taking and willing to accept a much lower profit